The first sign something was wrong came at 14,000 feet, when Lieutenant Colonel Kira Valdez noticed her wingtip wasn't where it should be. Not the position itself. That was exactly where her flight plan indicated. The problem was the silence on the radio frequency that should have been crackling with chatter. Instead, nothing but static whispered through her helmet speakers as her F-22 Raptor sliced through crystalline morning air above the Nevada test range. "Control, this is Phantom 77, requesting position confirmation," she transmitted, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her stomach. The response came back garbled, fragmented words dissolving into electromagnetic soup. She'd been flying combat aircraft for 12 years, accumulating over 3,000 flight hours across 3 different airframes, but she'd never experienced complete radio blackout during a routine training exercise. Below her, the desert stretched endlessly, a canvas of burnt ochre and shadow that had witnessed countless military secrets. Today felt different. The other 3 Raptors in her flight, Coulson's Viper, Hammer, and Ghost, maintained perfect formation, their angular stealth profiles cutting through thermals rising from the scorched earth. Yet something in their positioning troubled her, a subtle deviation from standard doctrine that her combat-honed instincts couldn't ignore. "Viper lead, Phantom 77, radio check," she called to the flight commander, Major Rick Blackwood. Static answered her. She tried again on the backup frequency, then the emergency channel. Nothing. It was as if the electromagnetic spectrum had simply ceased to exist around their 4 aircraft. The briefing that morning had been routine, a formation flight to test new countermeasure systems against simulated surface-to-air threats. Textbook stuff for pilots of their caliber. But now, studying her tactical display, Valdez noticed something that made her blood run cold. Their flight path was taking them directly over grid reference Papa 7 Alpha, a section of the range that had been marked as restricted for the past 6 months. She'd questioned the routing during the briefing, politely nodding the discrepancy to her squadron commander. "Don't worry about it, Phantom," he'd said with that condescending smile she'd grown to despise. "Just follow your wingman and everything will work out fine." The implication was clear. She was expendable cargo on this mission, despite her superior combat record and recent promotion. The old boys club still viewed her as an outsider, even after her distinguished flying cross from Afghanistan and her perfect safety record. But Valdez hadn't survived 3 combat deployments by following orders blindly. Her father, a Vietnam-era helicopter pilot, had taught her that survival often depended on the details everyone else missed. Right now, those details were screaming warnings that her instincts couldn't ignore. Something was very, very wrong with this training exercise. The desert sun climbed higher, and her F-22's shadow raced across the wasteland below, carrying secrets that would soon demand answers. In the cockpit of the world's most advanced fighter jet, Lieutenant Colonel Kira Valdez was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who wear the same uniform. Valdez adjusted her grip on the stick and checked her 6 o'clock position through the mirrors mounted on her canopy frame. Clear sky stretched behind her, painted in shades of blue that reminded her of summers in New Mexico, where she'd first dreamed of flying. Those dreams felt distant now, replaced by the harsh reality of military politics and gender discrimination that followed her like contrails. Her call sign, Phantom, had originated during pilot training, earned not through any dramatic aerial maneuver, but through her uncanny ability to appear in places where others expected empty airspace. Instructors initially found it annoying, her habit of materializing on their wing during training sorties when they thought they were alone. But combat had transformed that trait into an asset. In Afghanistan, she'd saved 2 different flights by appearing at crucial moments, her sensors detecting threats that others had missed. The irony wasn't lost on her that today she felt like the ghost, invisible to her own flight members who seemed to be operating under different rules. She cycled through her radio frequencies again, methodically checking each preset. Her communications suite was functioning perfectly. She could hear distant air traffic control chatter from civilian airports hundreds of miles away. Yet her own flight remained eerily silent. Hammer 2, Phantom 77, Flash Override. She tried the emergency authentication code that would demand an immediate response. Captain Jennifer Morrison, flying the number 2 position, was one of the few pilots in the squadron who didn't treat Valdez like an unwelcome guest at a fraternity party. If anyone would break protocol to respond, it would be Morrison. Silence. Valdez felt the familiar weight of isolation pressing against her shoulders, the same sensation she'd experienced countless times during her career. Being the first female pilot in her squadron hadn't been easy. Being the first to earn command of a flight had been harder. But this felt different. This felt like betrayal. She checked her fuel state and navigation systems, confirming what she already knew. They were precisely on course for Papa 7 Alpha, despite the restriction notices that should have kept them 50 miles away. The restricted area had appeared on flight planning maps 6 months ago, coinciding with increased activity from unmarked transport aircraft that local pilots had nicknamed ghost flights. Her radar warning receiver remained quiet, showing no indication of ground-based tracking systems or missile threats. That should have been reassuring, but it only deepened her suspicion. The Nevada test range was one of the most heavily monitored pieces of airspace in North America. Complete electronic silence suggested either catastrophic equipment failure or deliberate jamming. The F-22's advanced sensor suite painted a detailed picture of the terrain ahead. She could see the geometric patterns of abandoned mining operations, the straight lines of forgotten roads, and something else, something that made her heart rate spike despite years of combat conditioning. Structures that weren't on any map she'd studied. Her aircraft's defensive systems remained green across the board, but Valdez trusted her instincts more than instruments. 12 years of flying had taught her that survival often depended on reading the subtle signs that technology missed. The way shadows fell across unfamiliar terrain, the patterns of dust clouds that suggested human activity, the silence where there should be sound. Below, the restricted zone approached like an open mouth, waiting to swallow her flight whole. The first visual confirmation came at 12,000 feet, when Valdez spotted the telltale glint of metal structures nestled between two ridgelines that formed a natural canyon. Her helmet-mounted display automatically recorded the images while she maintained formation, but her trained eyes were already cataloging details that wouldn't show up in digital files. Vehicle tracks crisscrossed the valley floor in patterns suggesting heavy equipment movement. Temporary structures dotted the landscape, the kind of prefabricated buildings used for classified operations that needed to disappear quickly. Most concerning were the aircraft. 3 transport planes sat on a makeshift airstrip, their profiles unfamiliar despite her encyclopedic knowledge of military aircraft. They were too large to be standard cargo haulers, too angular to be civilian designs. Advanced electronic warfare pods hung beneath their wings like mechanical parasites, and their matte black paint scheme absorbed sunlight in ways that suggested stealth technology. "Jesus Christ," she whispered inside her helmet, the words lost in the cockpit's white noise. This wasn't a training exercise. It was a reconnaissance mission over a black site operation that officially didn't exist. Someone had used her flight as unwitting intelligence gatherers, counting on their inability to communicate with the outside world. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The radio jamming wasn't equipment failure, it was deliberate isolation. Her squadron commander's dismissive attitude during the briefing suddenly made sense. She was supposed to be a witness to something, but witnesses who couldn't report what they'd seen were valuable assets. Valdez keyed her radio again, knowing the effort was futile but needing to try. Any station, this is Air Force 77 declaring emergency. We are over restricted airspace without proper authorization." The static that answered her sounded almost mocking. Her F-22's navigation system, showed their flight path would take them directly over the facility in approximately 3 minutes. Whatever intelligence operation was unfolding below, someone had decided that 4 F-22 pilots needed to see it, or needed to be in position to be blamed for seeing it. She glanced at her formation, noting that Viper, Hammer, and Ghost maintained perfect positioning despite the communications blackout. That level of precision suggested they were receiving instructions she couldn't hear, probably through encrypted channels her aircraft wasn't configured to access. The realization hit her like a punch to the solar plexus. She was the only pilot in the flight who wasn't part of the plan. The canyon walls rose higher around the facility, creating a natural bowl that would hide operations from satellite surveillance. But 4 F-22s flying overhead would provide perfect photographic intelligence, especially if their sensors were recording everything. Valdez realized she was participating in industrial espionage or intelligence gathering that violated every principle she'd sworn to uphold. Her left hand moved to the master arm switch for her aircraft's weapons systems, not to engage targets, but to send a message that might penetrate the communications jamming. A weapons system activation would trigger automatic alerts across multiple military frequencies, possibly breaking through whatever technology was isolating her flight. The facility grew larger in her field of view, its secrets spreading below like a classified document written across the desert floor. The facility's true scope became apparent as they passed overhead at 10,000 feet. What had appeared to be a small research station from higher altitude revealed itself as a sprawling complex covering several square miles. Underground hangars had been carved into the canyon walls, their openings concealed by elaborate camouflage nets that shimmered with the telltale rainbow patterns of radar-absorbent materials. Valdez's helmet-mounted targeting system automatically designated points of interest, creating a digital record that someone clearly wanted her to capture. Advanced radar arrays dotted the perimeter, their dishes tracking her flight with mechanical precision. She counted at least 12 separate installations, each representing technology that shouldn't exist outside of classified development programs. The black aircraft on the runway weren't transports. They were test beds for experimental stealth technology that made her F-22 look primitive by comparison. Their angular surfaces bent light in impossible ways, creating optical illusions that hurt to study directly. Maintenance crews moved around them like ants servicing alien technology, their protective suits suggesting dangerous radiation or chemical hazards. Viper lead, Phantom 77, request immediate vector change to avoid restricted airspace, she transmitted, knowing her words would disappear into electromagnetic void, but needing to establish her official position for any recording devices that might capture her transmissions. If this became a legal matter, she wanted her objections on record. Her flight continued its predetermined course, ignoring her request as if she'd never spoken. Major Blackwood's F-22 held rock-steady formation, its pilot either unable to hear her or under orders to maintain radio silence. Both possibilities terrified her, but the second was worse. It suggested a level of operational security that demanded extreme measures to maintain. Below, security vehicles raced along perimeter roads, their dust clouds creating geometric patterns that spelled obvious concern. Someone down there was very unhappy about 4 F-22s photographing their classified operation, even if those fighters belonged to the same military that funded the project. Valdez activated her aircraft's electronic warfare suite, using passive sensors to map the facility's defensive systems. The results made her stomach clench. Surface-to-air missile batteries ringed the valley, their targeting radars already locked onto her flight. She was looking at enough firepower to eliminate a squadron of fighters, disguised as a research facility that didn't exist on any official map. Her tactical display painted threat symbols across the canyon like digital tombstones. SA-21 Growler systems, Patriot batteries, and something her computer couldn't identify, experimental weapons that existed only in classified briefings she wasn't cleared to attend. Any one of these systems could destroy her aircraft before she could react, and someone had flown her directly into their engagement envelope. The realization crystallized with horrible clarity. This wasn't intelligence gathering. This was a setup. Someone needed her flight to be in this exact position at this exact time, flying over classified installations while completely unable to communicate with the outside world. They were being positioned to take blame for something, or to be eliminated as inconvenient witnesses. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, words spoken during her teenage years when she'd first expressed interest in military aviation. The most dangerous missions are the ones they don't tell you are dangerous. Lieutenant Colonel Ramon Valdez had survived 2 tours in Vietnam by questioning everything, especially routine flights that felt too routine. Now his daughter found herself trapped in the same kind of carefully orchestrated disaster, with nowhere to run and no way to warn anyone about what she'd discovered. The missile launch came without warning, a brilliant streak of light ascending from the valley floor toward Ghost 3's position. Captain Dave Sullivan never saw it coming. The SA-21's hypersonic interceptor covered the distance in seconds, its fragmentation warhead detonating 50 feet from his F-22's starboard wing. The explosion shattered the morning silence like a thunderclap, sending shock waves across the canyon walls. Ghost 3's Raptor tumbled out of formation, its right wing severed at the root, fuel streaming behind it in a crystalline arc that caught sunlight like liquid diamonds. Sullivan's ejection seat fired automatically, rocketing him clear of the disintegrating aircraft just as its fuel tanks ignited in a spectacular fireball. "Jesus, Jesus, we're taking fire." Major Blackwood's voice crackled over the emergency frequency, the first transmission Valdez had heard from her flight leader all morning. The communications jamming had been switched off the instant live weapons entered the equation, restoring radio contact with surgical precision. "Viper Lead, this is Nevada Control. You are cleared for immediate emergency egress. Vector 270, climb to Angels 20. Emergency recovery teams are scrambling to your location." The air traffic controller's voice carried professional calm that barely concealed underlying panic. Someone had just launched a surface-to-air missile at United States Air Force aircraft over American soil. Valdez threw her F-22 into a violent left turn, pulling 6 gs as she dove toward the canyon floor. Her training took over, muscle memory from countless hours in the simulator translating into instinctive defensive maneuvers. The facility's air defenses would have multiple targeting solutions plotted. Staying high and fast would only make her an easier target. "Phantom 77, negative on the climb," she transmitted while rolling inverted to present a smaller radar cross-section. "Multiple SAM threats active. Recommend nap of the Earth egress route." Her voice remained steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, years of combat experience overriding the natural fear response that would have paralyzed a less experienced pilot. Hammer 2's aircraft suddenly lurched sideways, its pilot fighting to maintain control as another missile detonated nearby. Captain Morrison's F-22 shed composite panels like metallic snow, its stealth coating peeling away to reveal aluminum structure beneath. Warning lights painted her cockpit red as multiple systems failed simultaneously. "Mayday, Mayday, Hammer 2 declaring emergency. I've lost hydraulics and my flight controls are barely responding." Morrison's transmission carried the controlled tension of a pilot facing imminent death while still trying to save her aircraft. The valley floor rushed up toward Valdez at terrifying speed, but she held her dive until the last possible second before pulling out just 50 feet above the desert floor. Her F-22's engine screamed in protest as she firewalled the throttles, using the canyon walls to mask her approach from the facility's tracking radars. If she could get low enough fast enough, she might slip under their minimum engagement altitude. Behind her, Ghost 3's parachute drifted toward Earth like a falling star, Captain Sullivan's survival depending on rescue teams that might never reach him. The facility below had just committed an act of war against their own Air Force, and witnesses were clearly unwelcome. Her helmet display showed multiple missile launches tracking toward her position, deadly mathematics calculating intercept courses while she fought to stay alive. The canyon walls provided momentary shelter as Valdez hugged the terrain, her F-22's belly nearly scraping rocky outcrops that had stood unchanged for millennia. Her radar warning receiver screamed constant alerts, painting threat symbols across her display like electronic graffiti. Every surface-to-air system in the valley was actively hunting her, their targeting computers calculating precise intercept solutions for a fighter that shouldn't exist on their threat libraries. All Viper flight, this is Nevada Control declaring DEFCON 2 alert status. You are authorized to engage hostile targets with extreme prejudice. Repeat, you are weapons-free on any target presenting imminent threat to United States aircraft. The controller's voice carried new authority, backed by protocols that transformed a training exercise into active combat operations. Major Blackwood responded immediately, his F-22 climbing to attack altitude while targeting systems locked onto the missile sites below. Nevada Control, Viper lead requesting target designation for immediate strike. We have American pilots down and need to suppress these SAM sites before rescue operations can commence. Negative, Viper lead. The controller's response came after a suspicious pause. Maintain defensive posture only. Higher authority is coordinating appropriate response. Your priority is safe egress from the combat zone. Valdez felt ice crystallize in her veins. Someone was preventing them from defending themselves, leaving American pilots vulnerable to enemy fire on American soil. The communications jamming, the restricted airspace, the convenient weapons failure authorization, every element suggested an operation designed to eliminate witnesses while maintaining plausible deniability. Another missile launch streaked upward from the facility's northern perimeter, its trajectory calculated to intercept Hammer 2's damaged aircraft. Captain Morrison was flying straight and level, unable to maneuver with her compromised flight controls. She would never see the interceptor coming. Hammer 2, break right. Break right now. Valdez screamed into her radio while pulling her own aircraft into a climbing turn that would position her between Morrison and the incoming missile. Her F-22's defensive systems activated automatically, deploying chaff and flares in carefully calculated patterns designed to seduce heat-seeking warheads away from human targets. The missile's proximity fuse activated 50 feet from Morrison's aircraft, its fragmentation warhead spraying tungsten pellets across empty sky where the F-22 should have been. Valdez's defensive maneuver had positioned her aircraft directly in the weapon's path, using her fighter as a decoy to save her wingman's life. Shrapnel peppered her starboard wing, punching holes through composite skin and severing control cables. Her F-22 shuddered like a wounded animal, its fly-by-wire computers struggling to compensate for asymmetric damage. Warning lights cascaded across her instrument panel in a waterfall of amber and red, but her engines continued running, and her primary flight controls still responded. Phantom 77, say status, Morrison transmitted, her voice tight with guilt and gratitude. Still flying, still fighting, Valdez replied while checking her systems. Hydraulic pressure was dropping on the right side, and her fuel flow indicators showed damage to the starboard wing tank. She had perhaps 30 minutes of flight time remaining before fuel starvation forced an emergency landing. The question was whether the facility below would allow her to survive that long. Through her canopy, she could see security vehicles converging on Ghost 3's landing site, their intent clearly hostile rather than helpful. The rescue helicopter appeared on Valdez's radar at the worst possible moment, its U-60 Black Hawk profile climbing steadily toward Ghost 3's landing coordinates. The aircrew was flying directly into a surface-to-air missile engagement zone, their rotorcraft completely vulnerable to the same weapons that had just destroyed an F-22. Nevada Control, Phantom 77, advised rescue flight of active SAM threat. They're flying into a buzzsaw down there. Her transmission carried desperate urgency as she watched the helicopter approach certain destruction. Rescue 77, Nevada Control, be advised you are entering hostile airspace. Multiple SAM sites are active and have already engaged friendly aircraft. The controller's voice had taken on the hollow tone of someone reading from a script, following procedures that prioritized protocol over human lives. Nevada Control, Rescue 77, we have a pilot down and are continuing to target regardless of threat level. That's our job. The helicopter pilot's response carried the quiet determination of someone who had accepted death as a job requirement. Combat search and rescue crews didn't abandon American pilots, even when common sense suggested tactical withdrawal. Valdez rolled her damaged F-22 into another diving attack, using her aircraft's remaining stealth capability to mask the helicopter's approach. If she could keep the facility's attention focused on her, the rescue crew might reach Captain Sullivan before the SAM sites could engage their slower, more vulnerable aircraft. Her targeting pod locked onto one of the missile launchers, its thermal imagery revealing technical details that shouldn't exist in any known weapons system. The SA-21 variant deployed in the Valley incorporated technology, at least a generation beyond anything in current military inventories, suggesting either massive intelligence failures or deliberate technology transfers that violated every arms control treaty. Viper lead, Phantom 77, requesting permission to engage SAM site bearing 045 degrees from my position. I have a clean shot, and the rescue flight needs suppression coverage. Her request was tactically sound and operationally necessary, but she already knew what the response would be. Negative, Phantom 77. Higher authority has declared weapons hold on all ground targets. You will maintain defensive posture only. Major Blackwood's voice carried frustration that matched her own, but orders were orders, even when those orders guaranteed American casualties. The missile launch from the eastern ridge came without warning, a hypersonic interceptor streaking toward the rescue helicopter with mathematical precision. The US-60's defensive systems were designed for small arms fire and rocket-propelled grenades, not advanced surface-to-air missiles guided by radar systems worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Valdez made her choice in the split second before the missile reached its target. She dove her F-22 directly into the weapon's path, using her fighter's superior speed and maneuverability to intercept a warhead designed to destroy aircraft exactly like hers. Her damaged starboard wing took the full force of the explosion, composite materials vaporizing under thermal and kinetic assault that would have reduced the helicopter to burning debris. Her F-22 tumbled out of controlled flight, its computer-assisted stability compromised by structural damage that overwhelmed even advanced flight control systems. She was falling toward the same canyon floor where Captain Sullivan waited for rescue, her sacrifice buying precious seconds for the helicopter crew to complete their mission. But sometimes seconds were enough. The canyon walls spun past her canopy in a kaleidoscope of rock and shadow as Valdez fought to regain control of her dying aircraft. Her F-22's flight control computers were cycling through emergency protocols, trying to find a combination of thrust and aerodynamic surfaces that would restore stable flight. Warning lights painted her cockpit like a Christmas tree, each illuminated indicator representing another system pushed beyond operational limits. Phantom 77, punch out, eject, eject. Major Blackwood's voice crackled over the emergency frequency, his professional composure finally cracking as he watched another pilot's aircraft disintegrate in real time. Two F-22s destroyed in less than 10 minutes represented a catastrophic loss that would trigger investigations reaching the highest levels of military command. "Negative, Viper lead," Valdez replied while pulling her stick back in a last desperate attempt to arrest her dive. "Still have some fight left in this bird." Her airspeed was approaching structural limits, but her engines continued producing thrust, and her primary flight controls still responded to input. The F-22 was wounded, not dead, a distinction that might mean survival for everyone involved. She managed to level off at 2,000 feet, her aircraft's damaged wing generating enough lift to maintain marginal flight. Fuel was streaming from ruptured tanks, creating a visible contrail that would make her easy to track, but her navigation systems indicated she was only 12 miles from the canyon's eastern exit. If she could stay airborne for 6 more minutes, she might reach friendly airspace. The rescue helicopter had successfully reached Captain Sullivan's position, its crew working with mechanical efficiency to extract the downed pilot while surface-to-air missiles tracked overhead like deadly comets. Valdez's sacrifice had bought them the time they needed, proving that sometimes individual courage could overcome institutional cowardice. "Nevada Control, Rescue 77, we have the package and are egressing to the east. Be advised, the pilot reports seeing advanced weapon systems and unidentified aircraft at the target location. This information needs to reach intelligence evaluation immediately." The helicopter pilot's transmission would trigger security protocols designed to contain classified information, but at least Sullivan's observations were now part of the official record. Her radio crackled with new voices as command centers across the western United States scrambled to understand how American aircraft had been attacked on American soil. The initial confusion was giving way to focused anger, as senior officers realized that someone had deliberately positioned F-22s over a hostile facility, while jamming their communications and preventing them from defending themselves. All stations, this is NORAD command declaring air defense emergency. We have confirmed hostile action against United States aircraft over domestic territory. All military flights are directed to maintain maximum separation from grid reference Papa 7 Alpha until further notice. The facility below was about to face consequences that its planners had clearly not anticipated. Attacking F-22s was an act of war regardless of the political complexities involved, and the American military took such acts very personally. Whatever classified program was operating in the valley had just escalated beyond any possibility of diplomatic resolution. Valdez's fuel quantity indicators showed critically low levels as her F-22 limped toward the canyon exit. She had perhaps 3 minutes of flight time remaining before flameout forced an emergency, landing in terrain that offered few suitable options. The canyon's eastern wall loomed ahead like a natural fortress, its granite faces carved by eons of wind and water into formations that would challenge even a healthy aircraft. Valdez's damaged F-22 was far from healthy, its compromised aerodynamics making every control input a negotiation with physics that she wasn't guaranteed to win. Her altitude was too low for safe ejection over this terrain, leaving her committed to riding her aircraft down regardless of the consequences. The F-22's ejection seat was designed for high-altitude escapes, not low-level bailouts over mountainous terrain that would shred a parachute in seconds. Phantom 77, Nevada Control, we have emergency recovery teams standing by at Nellis Air Force Base. Can you maintain flight for recovery to controlled airfield? The controller's voice carried desperate hope, but hope wouldn't overcome the mathematical certainty of fuel exhaustion. Nevada Control, negative on Nelly's recovery. I'm showing flameout in approximately 2 minutes, looking for emergency landing options in my current location. She kept her voice steady while scanning the terrain ahead, searching for any stretch of reasonably flat ground that might allow a controlled crash landing. The canyon floor offered nothing but boulders and sand washes carved by flash floods. The mesa tops were too high for her current energy state. But there, a dry lakebed stretched between two ridgelines, its surface baked flat by decades of desert sun. It was narrow and short, barely adequate for an F-22 traveling at approach speeds, but it represented her only chance for survival. Nevada Control, Phantom 77, I have a possible emergency landing site bearing 090 degrees from my position. Dry lakebed approximately 2 miles long, surface appears hard-packed, requesting emergency services to the location. Her transmission would trigger massive search and rescue operations, but she needed to survive the landing before rescue became relevant. Her right engine flamed out first, its compressor sections finally succumbing to battle damage and fuel starvation. The F-22 yawed violently to the right, its twin-engine design suddenly reduced to asymmetric thrust that threatened to send her into an unrecoverable spin. She countered with left rudder and opposite aileron, using every technique learned in thousands of hours of training to maintain directional control. The dry lakebed rushed toward her at 200 miles per hour, its surface details becoming visible as her altitude decreased. What had appeared smooth from higher altitude revealed itself as a complex terrain of dried mud cracks and scattered rocks that would test her aircraft's landing gear beyond design limits. Her left engine coughed once, twice, then died completely. She was now flying a 65,000-pound glider with the aerodynamic efficiency of a falling refrigerator, her fate determined by momentum, gravity, and whatever flying skills she could summon from 12 years of military aviation. The touchdown was controlled violence, her F-22's landing gear absorbing impact forces that exceeded every specification in the aircraft's technical manual. The right main gear collapsed immediately, sending the fighter skidding across the lakebed in a shower of sparks and pulverized composite materials. She held the stick back, and the rudder centered, fighting to keep the aircraft pointed straight as it decelerated through speeds that would have been lethal without restraint systems. The F-22 finally stopped 1,200 feet from initial touchdown, its nose buried in a sand berm that had built up over decades of seasonal flooding. Valdez sat motionless in her ejection seat for several seconds, checking her body for injuries and marveling at the simple fact of continued existence. Her aircraft was destroyed, but she was alive, an outcome that had seemed impossible just minutes before. Nevada Control, Phantom 77 on the ground, she transmitted, her voice carrying exhaustion and relief in equal measure. Pilot is conscious and uninjured. Aircraft is a total loss, but I'm ready for pickup whenever rescue arrives. Through her shattered canopy, she could see dust clouds on the eastern horizon, where helicopters were already responding to her emergency. The Nevada Test Range's rescue capabilities were legendary, designed to retrieve pilots from situations exactly like this one. She would be back at Nellis Air Force Base within the hour, ready to tell her story to investigators who were already preparing the most classified debriefing in military history. But first, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. She had saved Captain Morrison's life, enabled Sullivan's rescue, and survived a deliberate ambush that should have killed everyone involved. Whatever political games had put her flight in jeopardy, they had underestimated the competence and determination of the pilots they were trying to eliminate. Her father would have been proud. Sometimes the most important victories were simply staying alive long enough to fight another day. The rescue helicopter's rotor wash created a sandstorm that reduced visibility to mere feet, but Valdez could hear the reassuring sounds of professional search and rescue teams establishing a perimeter around her crash site. Pararescue men moved with practiced efficiency, their equipment and procedures refined through decades of recovering downed pilots from hostile territory. "Ma'am, I'm Staff Sergeant Rodriguez with the 66th Rescue Squadron. We're here to get you out of this situation." The pararescueman appeared at her cockpit like a desert mirage, his Kevlar helmet and tactical vest marking him as one of the military's elite rescue specialists. "Are you experiencing any pain or difficulty moving?" "I'm fine, Sergeant, just eager to get out of this cockpit." Valdez began the complex process of disconnecting her life support systems, each connection representing another link to the aircraft that had nearly become her tomb. Her ejection seat systems were designed for easy egress, but battle damage had twisted the cockpit structure enough to complicate normal procedures. Rodriguez worked alongside her, his trained hands checking for hydraulic fluid leaks or structural damage that might trap her inside the wreckage. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to remain seated while we stabilize the aircraft. Your nose gear collapsed during the landing, and the weight distribution is making the airframe unstable. Any shift in center of gravity could cause the aircraft to tip forward." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur of professional competence as rescue teams secured her F-22 with cables and anchors that would prevent movement during extraction. Each procedure had been rehearsed countless times, but the reality of working around a classified aircraft added complexity that couldn't be simulated in training exercises. "Lieutenant Colonel Valdez, this is Colonel Sarah Martinez with Air Force Office of Special Investigations. I need to speak with you immediately regarding today's incident." The OSI colonel had arrived with the second wave of rescue aircraft, her presence indicating that political dimensions were already overtaking operational concerns. Valdez emerged from her cockpit to find herself surrounded by more senior officers than she'd seen in one place since her last promotion ceremony. Generals, colonels, and civilians in expensive suits clustered around the crash site like well-dressed vultures, each representing different aspects of a military bureaucracy suddenly confronted with uncomfortable questions. "Colonel Martinez, I'm happy to cooperate with any investigation, but I'd like to point out that my flight was deliberately positioned over a classified facility without proper authorization or communication capabilities. Someone used us as unwitting reconnaissance assets and then tried to eliminate us when things went sideways." Her words carried accusation that couldn't be softened by military courtesy. "Lieutenant Colonel, I need you to understand that everything you observe today is classified at the highest levels. Your debriefing will be conducted in secure facilities with appropriate clearances for all personnel involved. Until that debriefing is complete, you are not authorized to discuss any aspect of today's events with anyone." Martinez's voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making problems disappear. But Valdez had spent 12 years navigating military politics, and she recognized the tactics being used to isolate and control her testimony. "Colonel, with all due respect, I was nearly killed by American weapons fired from American soil. My wingmen are casualties of what appears to be a deliberately planned ambush. Those facts aren't classified. They're acts of war that demand accountability." The silence that followed her statement stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Senior officers exchanged glances that spoke volumes about conversations that had already taken place in secure conference rooms far from the crash site. Whatever operation had been running in the restricted area, its exposure was causing problems that reached the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the radio, breaking the tension with news that changed everything. "Nevada Control, Hammer 2 declaring emergency. I've discovered something that needs immediate attention." Her F-22 was circling the restricted area at high altitude, her damaged aircraft sensors focused on the facility that had tried to destroy them. What she found there would transform a training accident into the biggest military scandal in decades. "Nevada Control, Hammer 2 reporting complete evacuation of the target facility. All structures are being dismantled by demolition teams, and the airstrip is being destroyed by explosive charges. Whatever was down there, someone is making it disappear fast." Morrison's voice carried the controlled urgency of a pilot reporting intelligence that would reshape military history. The senior officers around Valdez's crash site suddenly found urgent reasons to step away from their conversations, cell phones appearing with the synchronization of a dance troupe. The facility that had attacked American aircraft was being erased from existence, while investigators were still responding to the incident, a cover-up operating at speeds that suggested extensive pre-planning. Colonel Martinez, I think we need to have a very different conversation about today's events, Valdez said, while watching the civilian officials attempt to manage a crisis that was rapidly spiraling beyond their control. Someone planned this entire operation, from the communications jamming to the weapons engagement to the immediate destruction of evidence. The question isn't what I saw, it's who ordered us to see it. Colonel Martinez's expression shifted from bureaucratic authority to genuine concern as the implications became clear. This wasn't a training accident or intelligence failure. It was a carefully orchestrated event designed to eliminate witnesses to something so classified that killing American pilots was considered an acceptable cost of secrecy. Lieutenant Colonel, I need you to accompany me to a secure facility immediately. This conversation cannot continue in an unsecured environment. Martinez gestured toward a nondescript helicopter that had landed during the confusion, its civilian markings and sophisticated communications equipment identifying it as belonging to agencies that didn't officially exist. Valdez looked at the aircraft, then at the civilian officials who were trying to contain a situation that had already spread far beyond their control. Her training told her to follow orders, but her instincts screamed warnings that echoed her father's voice. The most dangerous moments came when authority figures demanded immediate compliance without explanation. Colonel, with respect, I'm not going anywhere until I know my wingmen are safe and accounted for. Captain Morrison is still flying a damaged aircraft, and Captain Sullivan was extracted from a hostile landing zone. My responsibility to them doesn't end just because some classified operation went sideways. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who had earned leadership through competence rather than politics. The standoff that followed would define the rest of her military career. Senior officers, intelligence officials, and rescue personnel formed an impromptu council of war around the wreckage of her F-22. Each group representing different aspects of a military establishment suddenly forced to confront its own shadows. Major Blackwood's voice broke the tension. Nevada Control, Viper Lead requesting immediate clearance for formation landing at Nellis. We have battle damage, wounded personnel, and intelligence that requires immediate evaluation by competent authority. His transmission cut through the bureaucratic maneuvering with operational reality that couldn't be ignored. The flight commander, who had seemed complicit in the morning's ambush, was now demanding accountability with the same professional competence that had made him a squadron leader. Whatever orders he'd been following, the reality of American casualties had clarified his priorities in ways that no briefing could have anticipated. Colonel Martinez made her decision with the decisive authority that had earned her position in military intelligence. All rescue and investigation personnel will accompany the surviving pilots to Nellis Air Force Base for immediate debriefing. The crash site will be secured by military police until a complete investigation can be conducted. And I want a full communications intercept analysis of today's events within 6 hours. As Valdez climbed aboard the rescue helicopter, she caught a final glimpse of the restricted area where the morning's events had unfolded. Smoke columns rose from multiple locations as demolition teams worked to erase evidence of whatever operation had been worth killing American pilots to protect. The facility was disappearing as thoroughly as if it had never existed. But some secrets were too big to bury, even with unlimited resources and institutional authority. The attack on her flight had created witnesses, documentation, and evidence trails that would eventually lead investigators to uncomfortable truths about operations conducted in democracy's shadows. The helicopter lifted off toward Nellis Air Force Base, carrying survivors who would spend the rest of their careers trying to understand what they had witnessed in a canyon that officially didn't exist. Whatever had been hidden there was now exposed, and the cover-up was beginning. The debriefing room at Nellie's Air Force Base looked like every other conference room Valdez had endured during her career. Fluorescent lights, government-issued furniture, and the stale air of recycled secrets. But the collection of officials assembled around the table represented levels of classification she'd never encountered, even during her most sensitive combat deployments. General Patricia Hawkins, commander of Air Combat Command, sat at the head of the table with the bearing of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Her presence indicated that today's events had reached the highest levels of military leadership within hours of occurring. Lieutenant Colonel Valdez, before we begin, I want you to understand that everything discussed in this room is classified beyond any clearance level you currently hold. Your participation in today's events has automatically elevated your security status, but that comes with responsibilities that will affect the rest of your career. The general's voice carried authority that brooked no argument. Beside her sat Director James Harrison from an agency whose acronym Valdez didn't recognize, his civilian clothes and careful neutrality marking him as someone who operated in the spaces between official government and classified operations. His presence suggested that today's incident had implications reaching far beyond military aviation. General, with respect, I think my career concerns are secondary to the fact that American weapons were used against American aircraft on American soil. Whatever operation was running in that facility, it committed acts of war against the United States Air Force. Valdez kept her voice steady despite the anger that had been building since her crash landing. Captain Morrison entered the room with her arm in a sling, her flight suit torn and stained from her emergency landing at a civilian airfield 50 miles from the restricted area. Her F-22 had been too damaged to reach Nellie's, forcing her to put down on a rural highway that local authorities had hastily cleared of traffic. "Ma'am, I can confirm everything Lieutenant Colonel Valdez observed. The facility in Grid Papa 7 Alpha contained advanced weapons systems and aircraft that don't match any known configurations in our threat databases. Someone was testing technology that shouldn't exist, using American airspace as a laboratory." Morrison's report carried the clinical precision of a trained intelligence officer. Director Harrison leaned forward with interest that seemed genuine rather than bureaucratic. "Captain, can you provide technical specifications for the aircraft you observed? Any details about propulsion, configuration, or performance characteristics would be valuable for our assessment." "Sir, I recorded everything my sensors captured, but I should point out that standard intelligence protocols were violated throughout this operation. Our communications were jammed, our flight path took us over restricted airspace without proper clearance, and when we were attacked, higher authority prevented us from defending ourselves." Morrison's accusation hung in the air like cordite smoke. The silence that followed stretched long enough to become uncomfortable before General Hawkins responded. "Captain, I want you to know that no one in this chain of command authorized the engagement of American aircraft. The attack on your flight was unauthorized by any legitimate military authority, which makes it an act of terrorism rather than friendly fire." The distinction was important because it changed the legal framework surrounding the entire incident. Friendly fire was a tragic accident. Terrorism was a criminal act that demanded investigation and prosecution. Someone had just elevated a classified operation into a matter of national security. Captain Sullivan was wheeled into the room on a medical gurney, his ejection seat having compressed his spine during the high-speed separation from his disintegrating F-22. His injuries weren't life-threatening, but they would end his flying career and serve as a permanent reminder of the morning's events. "Dave, how are you feeling?" Valdez asked. her command responsibility extending to crew members long after their aircraft had been destroyed. "Like I got hit by a truck, ma'am, but I'm alive thanks to you and the rescue crew." Sullivan's voice carried exhaustion and pain medication, but his eyes remained sharp with the intelligence that had made him one of the squadron's most reliable pilots. "Ma'am, I need to report something about the facility that attacked us." His observation would chain everything they thought they knew about the morning's events. Sullivan struggled to sit upright despite his injuries, his urgency overriding medical protocols that recommended complete rest. "General, while I was descending under my parachute, I had a clear view of the entire facility. Those weren't American personnel operating the weapons systems that shot us down." The statement hit the room like a physical blow, transforming an internal security matter into potential foreign espionage or invasion. Director Harrison's carefully maintained neutrality cracked as he leaned forward with genuine alarm. "Captain, explain what you observed. Be as specific as possible about personnel, uniforms, equipment, and any identifying markings." Harrison's voice carried the intensity of someone whose job involved tracking threats that most people couldn't imagine. "Sir, the crew operating the SA-21 system were wearing digital camouflage patterns I didn't recognize, and their equipment protocols were different from standard Russian or Chinese procedures. But what really stood out was the vehicle markings. They were using NATO standard tactical symbols, but in configurations that don't match any known military organization." Sullivan's report suggested the presence of a military unit that officially didn't exist. General Hawkins exchanged a glance with Director Harrison that spoke volumes about conversations that had taken place in secure facilities far from Nelly's Air Force Base. Whatever, Sullivan had observed confirmed suspicions that someone had been hopping to avoid. "Captain, during your descent, did you observe any aircraft movements or personnel evacuation from the facility?" The general's question indicated that intelligence assets had been monitoring the site even before the morning's attack. "Yes, ma'am. Multiple transport aircraft were conducting emergency evacuation procedures, and I counted at least 12 vehicles moving equipment from underground storage areas. Whatever operation was running there, they had contingency plans for rapid site abandonment." Sullivan's training as an intelligence officer was evident in his systematic observation and reporting. The facility had been prepared for exposure, suggesting that the attack on their flight was part of a larger operational plan rather than a spontaneous security response. Someone had wanted American pilots to witness the site's capabilities, then used their presence to justify its immediate destruction. Valdez felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. "General, I believe we were used as unwitting cover for whatever operation was being terminated at that facility. Our flight provided justification for immediate evacuation and destruction of evidence, while our deaths would have eliminated the only witnesses who could have provided detailed technical intelligence." The accusation was serious enough to end careers or trigger congressional investigations, but the evidence supported conclusions that couldn't be ignored. Someone within the American military establishment had collaborated with foreign operators to conduct classified research on American soil, then attempted to eliminate the witnesses when exposure became inevitable. "Lieutenant Colonel, that's a very serious allegation," General Hawkins replied, but her tone suggested consideration rather than dismissal. "If you're correct, we're looking at treason at the highest levels of military and civilian leadership." Director Harrison cleared his throat with the diplomatic caution of someone accustomed to navigating political minefields. "General, I think we need to expand this investigation beyond military channels. The implications of foreign military operations on American soil require coordination with agencies that have broader authority than the Air Force can provide." The transformation from training accident to international incident was complete. What had begun as a routine formation flight had uncovered operations that threatened the fundamental security of the United States, and the surviving pilots found themselves at the center of a conspiracy that reached levels they were never meant to access. Outside the conference room, military and civilian investigators were already mobilizing resources that would eventually trace the morning's events to their sources, regardless of classification levels or political sensitivities. The investigation would take months, but the cover-up was already falling apart. 3 weeks later, Valdez sat in her government quarters at Nellie's, reading classified reports that painted a picture of military contractors, foreign intelligence services, and rogue elements within the American defense establishment collaborating on projects that violated every treaty and law governing military technology development. The facility in Grid Papa 7 Alpha had been a joint venture between a private defense contractor and what investigators euphemistically termed non-state actors, mercenaries and foreign operatives who provided technological expertise that American personnel couldn't officially possess. The advanced weapon systems that had attacked her flight were prototypes of next-generation air defense technology being developed for sale to the highest bidder. Her door chimed with the security protocol that announced official visitors. Colonel Martinez entered with news that would define the rest of her military career. "Lieutenant Colonel, I have new orders for you from Air Combat Command. You're being reassigned to a special projects office that handles sensitive technology assessment and threat evaluation. Your experiences during the Papa 7 Alpha incident have given you insights that the Air Force needs for future operations." Martinez's tone suggested opportunity rather than punishment. The assignment represented recognition of her competence and discretion, but it also meant permanent classification at levels that would isolate her from normal military relationships. She would spend the rest of her career working on projects that officially didn't exist, evaluating threats that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. "Colonel, what happened to the people responsible for the attack on my flight?" The question had been haunting her since the debriefing, representing her need for justice in a system that often prioritized secrecy over accountability. Some were arrested by federal authorities. Others disappeared before investigators could locate them. The defense contractor involved had its government clearances revoked and is facing criminal prosecution, but the foreign operatives were extracted by their handlers before we could identify them. Martinez's answer was typical of intelligence operations. Partial justice was better than no justice at all. Captain Morrison had been assigned to a similar special projects office, her technical expertise and combat experience making her valuable for evaluating foreign technology threats. Captain Sullivan was medically retired with full benefits and a disability rating that would support him for life, but his flying career was over. Major Blackwood faced a different fate. Investigators had determined that his participation in the morning's operation was involuntary. He had been following orders from superior officers, who were themselves following classified directives from agencies that operated outside normal military channels. But his career was effectively ended by association with events that would remain classified indefinitely. "Ma'am, there's something else you need to know," Martinez continued. "Your actions during the Papa 7 Alpha incident saved American lives and exposed foreign operations on American soil. The Air Force wants to recognize your heroism, but the classification levels involved mean that recognition will have to remain unofficial." It was typical of military service. The most important achievements were often the ones that couldn't be acknowledged publicly. Her Silver Star would be presented in a secure conference room with no media coverage and no public record, known only to the handful of officials cleared to understand what it represented. But some recognition mattered more than official medals. Morrison, Sullivan, and even Blackwood had requested assignment to her new unit, creating a team of pilots whose shared experience at Papa 7 Alpha had forged bonds stronger than normal military relationships. They would spend their careers protecting American airspace from threats that most people couldn't imagine, using hard-won expertise to prevent other pilots from facing the betrayals they had survived. Sometimes the most important victories were measured not in public recognition, but in lives saved and disasters prevented. Lieutenant Colonel Kira, Phantom, Valdez had found her purpose in the shadows between official policy and operational reality, where competence mattered more than politics and courage was measured by willingness to act when institutional authority failed. The morning sun rising over the Nevada desert painted the sky in shades that reminded her of the day her military career had almost ended in a canyon that officially didn't exist. But she was still flying, still fighting, and still protecting the democracy that had nearly sacrificed her for secrets that weren't worth American lives. Her father would have been proud of the daughter who had learned to question authority while maintaining her oath to defend the Constitution. In the end, that balance between skepticism and service defined the difference between a good pilot and a great one. The new assignment came with access to classified programs that most military personnel never knew existed, revealing a shadow world of advanced technology development that operated parallel to official defense procurement. Valdez found herself evaluating weapons systems that were decades ahead of acknowledged military capabilities, assessing threats from foreign technology that challenged every assumption about air superiority. Her office in a nondescript building at Nellie's had no windows, no identifying markings, and no visitors who weren't cleared for compartmentalized access to information that could reshape global military balance. The work was intellectually challenging and strategically vital, but it was also profoundly isolating from the normal camaraderie of squadron life. Captain Morrison had adapted to the classified environment with characteristic efficiency, her analytical mind thriving on complex technical assessments that required both engineering expertise and operational intuition. She had become Valdez's deputy, managing day-to-day operations, while the lieutenant colonel interfaced with agencies whose acronyms remained classified even within their secure facility. "Ma'am, we've received a new tasking from Strategic Air Command regarding anomalous radar contacts over the Pacific Northwest. The signatures don't match any known aircraft configurations, and the performance characteristics suggest technology that shouldn't exist in any current inventory." Morrison's briefing carried the clinical precision that made her invaluable for technical intelligence work. The patterns were familiar: unidentified aircraft with capabilities that exceeded acknowledged technology, operating in areas where their presence couldn't be easily explained. It suggested that the Papa 7 Alpha facility hadn't been unique, but part of a broader network of classified development programs that operated outside normal oversight mechanisms. "Jennifer, I want you to coordinate with NSA and DIA for any signals intelligence that might correlate with these radar contacts. If we're dealing with another unauthorized technology demonstration, we need to identify the players before they have a chance to disappear." Valdez had learned that preventing incidents was more effective than investigating them after American pilots were already at risk. The secure communications system chimed with an incoming priority message that would change their understanding of the threats they were tracking. Director Harrison's face appeared on the encrypted video link, his expression carrying urgency that had become familiar during their collaboration on the Papa 7 Alpha investigation. "Lieutenant Colonel, we've identified the source of those Pacific Northwest contacts. It's not foreign technology, it's American, but it's being operated by personnel who aren't supposed to have access to it. We have another Papa 7 Alpha situation developing, but this time we're going to handle it proactively." Harrison's words carried implications that made Valdez's pulse quicken. Someone was preparing to use her team as more than analysts and investigators. They were being positioned to take direct action against threats that conventional military forces couldn't officially acknowledge or engage. Sir, what kind of proactive measures are we discussing? My people are intelligence specialists, not direct action operators. Her question was tactically sound but strategically naive. The lines between intelligence and operations had been blurred beyond recognition in the shadow world they now inhabited. Lieutenant Colonel, your team has unique experience with unauthorized military technology and the operational security measures used to protect it. You understand the tactics, procedures, and mindset of people who are willing to attack American aircraft to protect classified programs. That makes you the most qualified personnel available for this type of mission. Harrison's logic was impeccable and terrifying. They were being asked to become the military's solution to problems that couldn't be solved through normal channels. A special operations unit designed to handle threats that existed in the margins between official policy and operational necessity. The mission briefing would take place in facilities that required clearances she didn't know she possessed, involving personnel whose existence wasn't acknowledged by any government directory. Her transformation from fighter pilot to intelligence officer to special operations commander was complete, driven by events that had taught her to expect betrayal from institutional authority and to find strength in small teams of competent professionals who shared common purpose. The briefing facility existed in the basement of a building that wasn't listed on any government property inventory, accessible through security protocols that required biometric verification and classified code words that changed daily. Valdez descended into a world that operated completely outside normal military bureaucracy, where decisions were made by people whose names didn't appear in any official chain of command. The conference room contained representatives from agencies she couldn't identify, military units that didn't officially exist, and civilian contractors who specialized in operations that couldn't be traced to government authorization. Director Harrison sat at the head of the table, with authority that suggested his influence reached far beyond his official position. Ladies and gentlemen, we're here to discuss Operation Nightshade, a direct action mission against unauthorized military technology development that threatens national security. The target is a facility operating in the Olympic National Forest in Washington state, where unknown personnel are testing advanced aircraft that pose immediate threats to civilian aviation. Harrison's briefing combined bureaucratic language with operational urgency. The facility photograph showed a sophisticated installation hidden beneath forest canopy, with underground hangars and test aircraft that made the Papa 7 Alpha operation look primitive by comparison. These weren't prototype weapon systems. They were operational aircraft capable of engaging military targets with technology that exceeded American defensive capabilities. Sir, what's our rules of engagement? Are we dealing with American personnel, foreign operatives, or some combination? Morrison's question cut to the heart of the tactical problems they would face. Captain, intelligence indicates a mixture of former American military personnel, foreign contractors, and civilian researchers who are working outside any legitimate government authority. They've demonstrated willingness to use lethal force against American aircraft, which makes them hostile combatants regardless of their citizenship status. Harrison's answer eliminated any remaining moral ambiguity about their mission. The target facility was defended by surface-to-air missile systems that had already engaged civilian aircraft, forcing emergency landings that were being attributed to mechanical failures rather than hostile action. Someone was conducting live-fire tests using American airspace as a laboratory, with civilian casualties dismissed as acceptable losses in pursuit of technological advancement. Lieutenant Colonel, your team will conduct reconnaissance and assessment of the facility's capabilities, then coordinate with direct action elements for target elimination. The operation will be conducted under special access protocols that provide complete operational security and legal protection for all personnel involved. Harrison's words carried authority that superseded normal military law. They were being authorized to conduct warfare against targets on American soil, using legal frameworks that existed in classified annexes to presidential directives that most government officials never saw. The constitutional implications were staggering, but the operational necessity was undeniable. Valdez studied the target intelligence with professional detachment, while her mind processed the personal implications. She was being asked to lead a military operation that could prevent other pilots from facing the betrayals her team had survived. But success would require embracing methods that violated every principle of transparent democratic governance. Sir, I need to understand the political oversight for this operation. Who has ultimate authority for mission authorization and rules of engagement? Her question touched on command responsibility issues that could determine whether they were heroes or war criminals. Lieutenant Colonel, this operation is authorized at the highest levels of national security leadership, with oversight limited to personnel cleared for special access programs. Your mission authority derives from executive directives that provide legal protection under national defense statutes. Harrison's answer was both comprehensive and completely unsatisfying. They were being asked to operate in the legal shadows, where constitutional protections were subordinated to operational necessities, protected by classification levels that would prevent any meaningful oversight or accountability. The mission would launch in 72 hours, giving her team just enough time to prepare for combat operations that officially wouldn't happen against targets that didn't exist. The pre-mission briefing took place in a hangar at Nelly's that contained aircraft Valdez didn't recognize. Their angular profiles and exotic propulsion systems, representing technology that existed decades beyond acknowledged military capabilities. Her team would be flying experimental aircraft that matched the performance characteristics of the targets they were hunting, leveling the technological playing field in ways that conventional military equipment couldn't achieve. Ma'am, these aircraft are designated F-35X variants, incorporating stealth and propulsion technology derived from captured foreign systems and domestic research programs. They're not officially part of the Air Force inventory, but their capabilities are necessary for operations against similarly advanced targets. The test pilot briefing her wore no rank insignia or name tags, his anonymity reflecting the classification levels surrounding their mission. Morrison was studying flight manuals that carried security markings she'd never seen before, technical specifications that revealed capabilities that challenged basic assumptions about aerodynamic possibilities. The aircraft they would be flying represented the cutting edge of military technology, but they were also experimental systems with limited operational history and unknown reliability factors. Jennifer, how are you feeling about flying an aircraft that's never been through normal testing and evaluation procedures? Valdez's question reflected concerns that extended beyond personal safety to mission effectiveness. Ma'am, I'd rather fly experimental American technology than face proven foreign systems with conventional aircraft. The Papa 7 Alpha incident taught me that technological superiority matters more than operational familiarity when survival is at stake. Morrison's response reflected the hard-won wisdom of combat experience that prioritized effectiveness over comfort. Captain Sullivan had been cleared for limited participation despite his medical retirement, his intelligence expertise making him valuable for mission planning, even though his injuries prevented him from flying combat aircraft. His presence provided continuity with their shared experience and personal investment in preventing other pilots from facing similar betrayals. Dave, what's your assessment of the target facility's defensive capabilities? Valdez valued his analytical skills and trusted his judgment based on their shared experience with unauthorized military installations. Ma'am, based on the intelligence we've received, this facility is significantly more sophisticated than Papa 7 Alpha. They have mobile air defense systems, underground facilities that can withstand direct attack, and aircraft that could engage our experimental fighters on equal terms. This isn't going to be a simple strike mission. It's going to be air-to-air combat against technology we don't fully understand. Sullivan's assessment was sobering but realistic. The mission would require tactical innovation and operational flexibility that couldn't be predetermined in briefing rooms or simulated in training exercises. They would be fighting in 3 dimensions against adversaries who understood their capabilities and limitations better than any previous enemy. Major Blackwood entered the hangar wearing civilian clothes and contractor identification that reflected his new status outside normal military channels. His participation had been specifically requested by Director Harrison, whose assessment of the mission requirements valued experience over institutional loyalty. "Rick, how does it feel to be back on the team?" Valdez asked, recognizing that his presence completed a circle that had begun with betrayal and evolved into shared purpose. "Ma'am, it feels like coming home. Whatever mistakes I made during Papa 7 Alpha, I want the chance to make them right." His response carried personal conviction that transcended professional obligation. The team that had been scattered by organizational politics and classification requirements was being reformed for a mission that would test everything they had learned about survival in the shadows between official policy and operational reality. Their aircraft were loaded with weapons that didn't appear in any public inventory, guided by targeting systems that incorporated artificial intelligence algorithms derived from captured foreign technology. They would be fighting fire with fire, using tools that matched their enemy's capabilities while operating under rules of engagement that provided maximum flexibility for battlefield decision-making. The mission launch was scheduled for 300 hours, during the darkness that would provide tactical advantage and operational security for an operation that couldn't withstand public scrutiny. Valdez stood beside her F-35X in the pre-dawn darkness, running through final systems checks on aircraft that represented the absolute pinnacle of American military technology. The experimental fighter's capabilities exceeded anything she had flown during her conventional Air Force career, but its unfamiliar systems and classified limitations created risks that couldn't be quantified through normal flight testing procedures. "Phantom 77, Phoenix Control, you are cleared for takeoff. Weather is clear, winds are calm, and your target area is showing no unusual activity on long-range surveillance." The controller's voice carried professional calm that belied the significance of their mission. Her team lifted off into starlit sky with the precision of experienced military aviators, their formation tight despite flying aircraft they had trained on for less than a week. The F-35X variants responded to control inputs with sensitivity that required constant adjustment, their advanced flight control systems compensating for aerodynamic characteristics that pushed the boundaries of known flight physics. "Phoenix Flight, this is Phoenix Lead. Maintain radio silence until we reach the operational area. Our mission is time-sensitive and requires complete surprise for successful execution." Valdez's transmission would be the last official communication until their return, marking their transition from acknowledged military aircraft to ghosts operating in the margins of legal authority. The Olympic National Forest spread below them like a dark ocean, punctuated by mountain peaks that caught starlight on snow-covered summits. Somewhere in that wilderness, hostile forces were conducting operations that threatened American airspace using technology that shouldn't exist outside government control. Their approach to the target area was conducted at low altitude, using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to avoid detection by defensive systems that their intelligence suggested were more sophisticated than anything they had previously encountered. The forest canopy provided natural camouflage for installations that had been designed to remain invisible to satellite surveillance and conventional reconnaissance. "Phoenix Lead, Phoenix 2, I'm picking up multiple radar emissions from the target area. They know we're coming. Morrison's transmission carried controlled tension as her aircraft's defensive systems detected tracking radars that were already calculating intercept solutions. The tactical situation was developing exactly as their mission planning had predicted. They were facing adversaries who possessed early warning capabilities that matched their stealth technology, creating a fair fight that would be decided by pilot skill rather than technological advantage. Phoenix Flight, Phoenix Lead, weapons free. Engage any target that presents a threat to American aircraft or airspace. Rules of engagement are unrestricted for hostile combatants. Valdez's authorization transformed their reconnaissance mission into active combat operations. The first missile launch came from a ridge line that had appeared empty on their approach, its hypersonic interceptor streaking toward Morrison's aircraft with accuracy that suggested guidance systems beyond current American capabilities. The engagement that followed would test everything they had learned about survival against opponents who understood their tactics and possessed equivalent technology. But they had advantages that couldn't be quantified in technical specifications. They were fighting for their country, their fellow pilots, and their own survival, while their enemies were mercenaries whose loyalty extended only to their paychecks. The air-to-air combat that erupted over the Olympic National Forest would be remembered by participants as the most intense engagement of their careers, but it would never appear in any official military history. The hostile aircraft that rose to meet them emerged from underground hangars with the fluid grace of technology that operated beyond conventional aerodynamic limitations. Their profiles defied easy classification: part fighter, part stealth aircraft, part something that seemed to challenge basic assumptions about powered flight itself. Phoenix Lead, Phoenix 3, I count 4 bogies climbing from the target area. Configuration unknown, but their performance characteristics are off the charts. Blackwood's transmission carried professional calm that masked genuine concern about facing technology that exceeded their intelligence estimates. Valdez rolled her F-35X into an aggressive climbing turn, using her aircraft's superior thrust-to-weight ratio to gain altitude advantage over opponents whose capabilities remained largely unknown. The experimental systems responded with precision that bordered on telepathy, translating her intentions into aircraft movement with efficiency that conventional fighters couldn't match. The engagement developed with lethal ballet choreography, each pilot maneuvering for position, while advanced targeting systems calculated firing solutions that could end lives in milliseconds. But these weren't training exercises or simulated combat. Mistakes would be measured in destroyed aircraft and killed aircrew. Fox 3, Morrison's call sign, announced the launch of her first missile, an advanced air-to-air weapon that incorporated guidance technology derived from captured foreign systems. The weapon tracked toward its target with perfect accuracy, but the hostile aircraft defeated it with countermeasures that suggested intimate knowledge of American missile characteristics. The enemy formation split into individual elements, each pilot demonstrating tactical competence that indicated extensive combat training and operational experience. These weren't test pilots or researchers. They were professional military aviators whose skills matched their technology. Valdez found herself locked in single combat with an aircraft whose pilot seemed to anticipate her every maneuver, countering her tactical decisions with precision that suggested either superior training or artificial intelligence assistance. Their aircraft spiraled through increasingly complex geometric patterns, each seeking the split-second advantage that would allow a killing shot. Phoenix Lead, Phoenix 4, I'm hit. Losing hydraulic pressure and my flight controls are degraded. Sullivan's voice carried across the tactical frequency despite his official status as ground-based mission coordinator. Someone had authorized his participation in active combat operations, trusting his experience and tactical judgment over medical restrictions. The hostile aircraft had divided their attention between individual dogfights and coordinated attacks that suggested sophisticated tactical doctrine and extensive training in formation combat. They were facing opponents who understood air-to-air warfare at levels that matched their technological capabilities. Valdez acquired her target in a brief moment when geometric relationships aligned perfectly. Her F-35X's weapons system achieving lock-on just as her opponent attempted an escape maneuver that would have defeated conventional missiles. Her AIM-260 JATM variant tracked through the enemy's countermeasures with persistence that reflected years of classified development work. The hostile aircraft disintegrated in a brilliant flash that illuminated the forest below, its advanced technology reduced to falling debris that would provide valuable intelligence for post-mission analysis. But there was no time for satisfaction. 3 more enemy aircraft remained operational, and her team was outnumbered and fighting with experimental systems against proven adversaries. The tactical balance was about to shift in ways that would determine whether any of them survived to report their discoveries. Morrison's voice cut through the tactical chatter with information that changed everything. Phoenix Lead, I've got multiple surface-to-air missile launches from the facility. They're engaging all aircraft indiscriminately, including their own fighters. The revelation transformed the air battle from organized combat into chaotic survival, as both American and hostile aircraft found themselves targeted by ground-based defensive systems that had been programmed to eliminate all aerial activity above the facility. Someone had activated autonomous weapons that couldn't distinguish between friend and enemy. All Phoenix elements, immediate egress to the northeast. The facility has gone weapons-free on everything in the air. Valdez's transmission triggered tactical withdrawal procedures, while hostile surface-to-air missiles tracked toward targets that included her own aircraft. The remaining enemy fighters were also attempting to disengage, their pilots apparently as surprised as the American aviators by the indiscriminate surface-to-air missile launches. The facility's automated defenses had eliminated human control from engagement decisions, creating a lethal environment that threatened everyone equally. Blackwood's aircraft took a proximity hit from an SA-21 variant that had been modified with guidance systems beyond current threat assessments. His F-35X shuddered under the impact of tungsten fragments that severed control cables and punctured fuel tanks, but the aircraft's advanced damage control systems kept him airborne. Phoenix 3, Phoenix Lead, state your condition, Valdez called while maneuvering to avoid multiple missile tracks that were converging on her position. Phoenix Lead, I'm flyable but barely. Fuel is streaming and my flight controls are responding intermittently. I can probably make it to friendly territory if we egress immediately. Blackwood's transmission carried professional calm despite facing immediate threats that would have overwhelmed less experienced pilots. The facility below was launching everything in its inventory, creating a surface-to-air missile environment that exceeded anything they had trained for during their careers. Advanced interceptors filled the sky like deadly fireworks, their exhaust trails creating geometric patterns against the forest canopy that mapped the mathematics of death. Sullivan's voice joined the tactical frequency with intelligence that explained the facility's desperate response. Phoenix elements, be advised that our attack has triggered facility self-destruct protocols. They're eliminating all evidence of their operations, including any aircraft that might carry sensor data about their capabilities. The automated defensive systems weren't trying to protect the facility. They were trying to prevent anyone from escaping with information about the technology that had been developed there. American and hostile aircraft were equally valuable intelligence assets that couldn't be allowed to reach friendly territory with technical data about classified programs. Phoenix Flight, Phoenix Lead, maximum performance climbed to Angels 40. We need to get above their engagement envelope before those automated systems eliminate all witnesses. Valdez's order pushed their experimental aircraft to performance limits that hadn't been fully tested, but survival required risks that exceeded normal operational parameters. The climb to high altitude was conducted under continuous missile attack from systems that demonstrated capability and persistence beyond anything in current threat databases. Their F-35X variants responded to emergency power settings with acceleration that exceeded their pilots' training expectations. But the hostile surface-to-air systems adapted to their performance with artificial intelligence that learned from each engagement. At 40,000 feet, they finally escaped the facility's immediate threat envelope, but their aircraft were damaged and their fuel states were critically low. The experimental fighters had performed magnificently under combat conditions that exceeded their design specifications, but they needed immediate recovery to friendly airfields before systems failures force.